going to do things that nobody ever would ever think even possible because he's following the radical left agenda. Take away your guns, destroy your Second Amendment, no religion, no anything, hurt the Bible, hurt God.
Hey all, I'm John Avlon, and this is Reality Check. America's polarization is poison to our politics, but it's gotten worse because of the partisan divide reflected in our identities. And one of those core identities is what we're going to dig into today. I'm talking about the politicization of religion in America and how we just might be able to depolarize our faith. Now, the rise of the religious right is a relatively recent phenomenon. Democrat Jimmy Carter was, by many accounts, the first born-again Christian presidential nominee who benefited from organized evangelical support. But 4 years after his election, the so-called moral majority rallied around Republican Ronald Reagan, and they have become an ever more vocal, powerful, and profitable core to the GOP. But this blurring of religion with partisan politics has had unintended consequences. Political scientist Michelle Margolis believes that as religion has been closely linked with conservative politics, we've had Democrats opting out of organized religion or being less involved and Republicans opting in. That's not healthy for our society because in the not-so-distant past there have been progressive as well as conservative faith traditions in the United States, both rooted in the teachings of the Bible. The progressive voices tended to emphasize calls for social and economic justice. The more conservative voices have focused on religious liberty and defense of traditional values. But can these competing strains of faith be reconciled? Can we depolarize or even depoliticize religion in America? Here with me to discuss that and more is the Reverend Walter Kim, the president of the National Association of Evangelicals. Reverend Kim, Jesus can be described as a rebel of love. He was political in that he had challenged the establishment of his time, but isn't that very different than being cast as a partisan figure?
John, thank you for having me on your show. And you evoke Jesus, who is obviously the core and the center figure in Christianity. Jesus demonstrated remarkable capacity, as you described, this rebel of love, reaching out to a range of people indiscriminate of their background. But at the same time, he was very discerning in the challenge of the way that powers tended to be used to marginalize people. And so his love was both broad, but it was also incisive.
It certainly was. And I think that point about him reaching out is one of the things that can help depolarize faith. I think that progressive Christian tradition, which has become sidelined at the very least in our politics, that's a message it can respond to. Why do you think we've not seen more energy around the emergence of a progressive left? Not in a partisan way, but simply recognizing those traditions in the Bible and trying to bring those about in a way that can shake up people's perceptions and understandings in, I think, a healthy way of recognizing the essential diversity of this community.
When we think about our expression of the faith, what does it mean to be people of the good news, which is in fact the original Greek word, euangelion, is eventually the word that becomes evangelical. And that word is literally just good news in the Bible. So in the desire to become good news people, within the NAE, there are a broad range of commitments. They certainly include issues like the sanctity of life, religious liberties, but within that is also commitment to racial justice, advocacy for the poor and the vulnerable, care for creation as a gift from God. The good news of Jesus encompasses all the issues that face humanity.
Donald Trump received a higher percentage of the evangelical vote than George W. Bush, who made his faith journey central to his political identity.
It is conservative to reform welfare by insisting upon work. It is compassionate to take the side of charities and churches that confront the suffering which remains.
How do you understand that dynamic? Because it is striking to me in that it doesn't meet that full list, the full spectrum of faith priorities that you just laid out. It seems like a contradiction to some extent.
You know, I think we're at a point where we need to have a more precise understanding of what evangelicalism is. I would say evangelicalism is in this inflection point. So, John, you described that evangelicals had voted a certain way. Well, it's a bit more accurate to say white evangelicals voted in that way, the 81%. But even in saying 81% of white evangelicals, is it self-identified white evangelicals? Do we differentiate between those who merely, because of cultural and historic reasons, would check off the box evangelical? Or are these people who are regularly attending church and expressing faith on a daily basis through prayer and Bible reading and all those things that historically would be reflective of deep religious faith? And I'm simply asking for a sense of recognition of just how complex this issue is in getting information and trying to categorize a wide swath of people when that swath of people itself is experiencing change.
Do you think, do you believe, do you hope that President Biden's own example of faith, his demonstrations of faith, his belief, could unlock the door to people's perceptions who do see faith as almost having a partisan divide? Have you seen evidence of that?
I think I've certainly seen evidence of a growing acknowledgement that President Biden is a man of deep religious faith. Now, there are those that may question it, and of course, we live in an incredibly contentious moment. But there are many that would certainly acknowledge the depth and sincerity of his faith.
As the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together.
My hope is that President Biden's sincere expressions of faith would be coupled with a deep desire to reach out to people who also have sincere expressions of faith, but different policy expressions.
When we come back, Reverend Kim reminds us that the evangelical movement in America has been core to our commitment to racial justice in the past, in particular during the abolitionist movement.
One of the things that was most compelling to me as a person of color was to discover the ways that evangelicals had been at the forefront of the issue of racial justice. So, a church that I used to work at in Boston, Park Street Church, that was the place where William Lloyd Garrison preached his first abolitionist sermon in the mid-1800s. Maybe surprising to many. Park Street Church was the place where the second chapter of the NAACP was founded in 1912. The National Association of Evangelicals in 1956 had a resolution calling for the passage of something that would eventually be the Civil Rights Act. They called it a call for human rights, and that it was incumbent upon people of faith, and specifically evangelicals, to be advocating for the equal treatment of all. I mean, this is an extraordinary part of the evangelical tradition that is often overlooked. But I would say, as a person of color, was tremendously powerful in my entering into faith.
And I think that's the kind of message that can challenge people's assumptions, because I think so much of the stereotype of, or the most vocal people in the political arena who identifies evangelicals are associated with the far right of the political spectrum, often white, often preoccupied with traditionalist social values in a way that gets eclipsed.
I really do believe we are at an inflection point in our country. This seems to be a level of polarization that we've not seen perhaps for 100 years, right? The kinds of polarization that existed in a former generation that would lead to a civil war, and then the discord that existed, during the Gilded Age that many have written about.
You invoke the Civil War, and I'm always reminded of the grace that Abraham Lincoln expressed at the height of that war. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in. Reverend Walter Kim, thank you so much for joining us on Reality Check for this very special conversation about how we can depolarize faith in America. Be well.
Thank you.